Roxo Media House.
Welcome back, everyone. We are FORTitude. That character there, Britton Payne, J.W. Wilson, brought to you by our friends at CapTex Bank.
Are we really doing this?
I mean, that's it.
That was such an
Do you want to
introduction.
get your surfing and pedal steel comments out of the way before we start?
Alex, do you have any questions about those things for me right now, or is it your interview today?
What is the pedal steel?
I play pedal steel. Oh, you don't even know what it is? It's okay. Don't get me started.
No, is this like pickleball with roller skates?
Yeah, pretty close.
The voice you're hearing is one Alexander Chandler. Thank you for coming to the show on FORTitude. We really appreciate the time. You, sir, have an amazing story, which we're going to go through tonight. It's almost too good to be true at times, and I know it's true because you've told it to me many times, and I've known you for a while.
Has it been the same each time?
It's never changed. It's never changed. You're not going to believe what this guy knows. It's incredible. Alexander, 26 years a realtor here in Fort Worth, had a company. He's now in an Alexander advisory group doing something different, but the guy's been around. He's got a family tree that is way past anything you and I could ever speak to.
Yeah.
But we are great. We're grateful to have you here, man. 1968, born in Austin. You got here as quick as you could, but your story is way longer than that. So let's get to the very gist of it. Tell us how your family first started and where they came from.
My family first started, and in 1620 in the United States, which was Nicholas Marteau, whose daughter married George Washington.
Okay.
And
the president.
George Washington, the president. He had George Reed was George Washington's grandfather, and George Washington's sister is my great grandmother. But it goes even
five greats, Britton.
Yes, but it goes even further than that. My great grandmother, when she fell off a horse about the turn of the century, did all the research and researched our family all the way back to Robert the Bruce.
Remember him from the movie Braveheart?
I do. He was the Scot who kind of played both ways, right? Like,
that's right.
Yes. Was it that guy?
Yes. And so what she did was, in order to find out the lineage, she wrote churches and things, and that's how you find who you really are, because tax records, birth records were all kept by churches. Mm-hmm. So she wrote letters and found all these
So
things.
Have you spent a lifetime kind of looking up your story like this?
I haven't had to do it because it's all in books and on paper. And over there I brought with this Taylor's a Tabernacle, which traces the Taylor family all the way back, of which Harriet James Taylor also was she was a descendant of James Madison as well.
Also
really?
a president, Britton.
Yes. So we have presidential blood here.
I think we do. Well, let's fast forward from Robert the Bruce. That's obviously quite a bit of time ago. Your relatives that landed in the United States in this continent. Let's start there. That's a good place to start.
Okay.
It gets pretty wild, but that's a good place to start.
1600s. That's where we're starting here.
Well, 1492 is when Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
He mentioned 16.
Right.
What was the first?
1620.
There you go. Let's go with that.
Nicholas Martineau, and he was a Huguenot, and a lot of people came over here because of the religious persecution.
Okay.
And then George Reed, who was George Washington's great grandfather, came over. He came over for a land grant.
Okay. So they're here.
And so George Washington's sister married a guy, Colonel Fielding Lewis, who was my father's namesake, and my grandmother's maiden name was Lewis. Okay. So we can trace that all the way back. That one's pretty simple.
Yeah. And then let's go from there.
Let's get to Texas. So
yeah, okay. How do we get here?
In San Antonio, the King Philip II of Spain wanted 200 families from the Canary Islands to come to the United States, and my great grandfather was one of the 16 original families that settled the settlement of Behar, which now became San Antonio. And his great granddaughter married John William Smith, who was the last messenger of the Alamo.
Oh, wow.
And there's a statue of him. And when you drive by, it looks like he's jumping over the wall because he's on the horse.
Okay.
It's the biggest statue there.
Yeah.
One of the original families in San Antonio.
Yes.
And then some of your family becomes prominent citizens of San Antonio, correct?
Yes. The first mayor of San Antonio.
First mayor.
And then actually one of my great-great-grandfather and was the first one to can chili con carne. We're really proud of that too.
To can it?
Yes.
I didn't know you did that. What? Explain.
Well, you take chili
You
con carne,
take chili
but
con
you put
carne
it in a
and-
can.
God, thank you.
And you can it. But let's
What is a popular brand of chili con carne that one might find on the shelves? The Chandler family name?
No, his name was Tobin.
Okay.
But let's get to Fort Worth if you want to get to that,
Please.
because this is FORTitude.
Yep.
But wait a minute, let me ask something. It says your mom and dad met at Fiesta.
At the Fiesta in San Antonio.
What? Okay, so not Fiesta, Texas.
No.
Like, I'm thinking, I didn't think they had that then. That was my first tip of, I don't know if we got the truth here when I read the thing and it says meeting at Fiesta. I figure they're like at the Six Flags of San Antonio. That's not accurate, correct?
No. And
Okay.
So
What is the Fiesta?
the Fiesta is just an annual spring fiesta in San Antonio.
Okay.
Just a big celebration.
Yep.
And it's their largest celebration of the year. And my parents were kind of put together, and they wound up liking each other. And
Okay.
what the irony is my mother's grandmother did research on my father to make sure that he was of good kind.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, I think so.
We
right?
found the letter. We found the letter. Yeah, that his lineage was okay.
Then did they meet up? Then they came back up here, or were they from here?
My family first got to Fort Worth in 1836. Both of John William Smith, who was the last messenger to the Alamo, he also was at the Battle of San Jacinto, because he took the last messenger out. When he came back, everybody was gone. So then on my mother's side, Jacob Matthews was in the Battle of San Jacinto, and he got one of the first land grants, because everyone that was at the Battle of San Jacinto or at the Alamo, their family got a land grant of 640
As a
acres.
thank you, as a thank you prize.
As a thank you prize.
Nice,
right.
nice of them.
So
Thanks for risking your life.
Thanks for dying. Actually,
So he chose to plot a land out near Benbrook where the Clear Fork River was.
Okay.
And then so he had started cattle ranching, and actually had made an agreement with the local Indian tribe that he could raise his cattle, and because it wasn't they weren't very pleased to have white settlers there.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yep.
And so supposedly there was a ceremony under a tree, and we used to shoot fireworks out by this little lake where all that happened. But then a guy, J.W. Corn, do you remember that old ranch house out 377, that old white ranch house across from Whitestone Golf Course? That was my great-great-grandfather's house.
And his name was what?
J.W. Corn.
That's a heck of a name. I mean, you could go far with that name. I think.
Is this what this
John
is
William.
about? Is this really about JW's lineage and
No.
where he comes from?
Well, my last name is Wilson and Corn. I don't think.
Oh, I
they're
thought it
two-
was
no,
Corn.
it wasn't
Oh,
no,
my bad.
no.
Okay,
Yeah,
keep going now.
J.W. fits. It's a powerful name. You get your own show with it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so JW had amassed a humongous cattle empire, and unfortunately, he bought a bunch of Hereford cattle, and went belly up. And he had 8 children, and a couple of them turned on him.
Oh, wow.
Tried to have him declared incompetent, and he was worth millions and millions of dollars at the time. But the problem was, the bankers, they started calling his notes, and he wound up going bankrupt. But we still had some of the ranch, and my grandfather fought it it started in 1923, and we were still fighting for the mineral rights and things.
Oh, really?
And so, yeah, it was kind of a bad thing where the family totally split. One side was trying to take his money, and the other side was trying to keep it.
Yeah.
And the only ones that profited were the banks.
How big was that ranch right there?
That ranch, it was as far as you could see. It was, I think that one was about 10,000 acres, but he owned over 100,000 acres.
Oh wow! So the
Total
bank
around the
ultimately
country.
took it back from him.
Bankers, yes.
Got
and
it.
a federal judge wound up getting some of the property, and my uncle was investigating it once, and a courthouse burned down where one of the venues were.
Oh.
But this is interesting. One of his ranches was the ranch in Van Horn, Texas, where, and I've actually been there. We drove by there once, and that was where Jeff Bezos'
His
spaceship landed. Was
really?
on the former ranch of J.W. Corn.
Oh, no.
And
Really?
it said the Corn Ranch
That's where he has that perpetual clock built into the mountain where it'll never lose time or something like that.
Well, that's where the first spacecraft that Jeff Bezos went in, where it landed.
Oh, wow.
Was in Van Horn, Texas, and that was where one of his ranches was.
But this is saying that that's not the only flying object in your history and lineage as well. There was something in Roswell.
In Roswell, yes, the debris field. J.W. Corn, he came to Fort Worth, and his brother went to Roswell and founded the Corn Ranch. And the part of the debris field for the spaceship, the UFO incident in Roswell, landed on his ranch.
Did he go and discover it, or how does that work?
His neighbor actually discovered it, but there were some objects on his ranch as well because the debris field was rather wide.
Did he keep any of them?
That I do not know.
There's nothing that's been passed down to you or anything like that.
No, other than it happened, and then reading the newspaper articles, because I went to New Mexico Military Institute and had a teacher that was there. He was 18 years old and was on guard duty when it happened, and he said they just shut the whole base down and nobody knew nothing, and everybody was sworn to secrecy.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
So J.W. Corn had 8 children. Was that your great grandfather or your grandfather?
Great grandfather.
Great or
great grandfather.
Okay.
And my great grandfather was the first vice president of the Associated Press, and he died in a car wreck. And then my grandfather always wanted to be a rancher, but and he was an engineer and went to A&M, and he built neon signs, and he built at the St. Louis World's Fair the largest neon sign in the world.
What was it of?
Yeah, I don't know what it was of, but he also built the Centennial liquor sign in Dallas.
Oh yeah,
and
where's that, on Harry Hines or something?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
How do I know that?
He built that
former life,
and he also and he was one of those guys that he would just start building and doing things. And what is now Salsa Limon was J&J's Oyster Bar that in Topsy's Diner that was on University.
Yeah,
he built that building out of scrap metal from the bomber plant.
Seriously?
So J.W. Corn, who is Jack Corn?
Jack Corn's my grandfather, J.W. Corn's grandson.
Grandson, okay.
Yes.
Tell us a little about Jack Corn. I see in this write-up, there's some incredible things that guy did.
The most incredible thing he did was while he was in South Texas, they didn't have much entertainment, so they had an arranged fight between the cowhands and my grandfather. My grandfather lost the fight, and my great uncle paid the guy
to take a fall.
No, to gouge my grandfather's eye out.
And he took
and I
the
said,
money?
"What did you do?" And he goes, "I put it back in. What do you think?"
I get offered that all the time with my co-host, but I
eye.
haven't taken it yet. So,
but he was a very interesting guy, and he had Corn aluminum awnings as well, and those were on the Kodak building in Dallas. And he actually worked on the Pegasus horse in Dallas too.
Because the sign.
He was a consultant on that.
Is he the Pentagon AC guy?
Oh yes, that's right. I almost forgot about that.
This is Jack Corn, correct?
Jack Corn, because he was an engineer during the building of the Pentagon. He helped design part of the air conditioning system for one of the sections, and I do have plans of it. It's just two small
in the Pentagon
of the Pentagon. Yes,
air conditioning system.
Part of the air conditioning.
Couple
system.
window units.
Yeah,
you said.
Yeah.
Nice. And then
they're not window units.
I'm kidding, of course. Yeah. He came to Fort Worth eventually. Jack.
Yes, he was born out at the ranch actually, but he had moved to Washington D.C. specifically to work on the Pentagon.
After this happened, he comes to what does he do in Fort Worth? He does several things that are relevant here. He knew a couple guys, like a guy named Amon Carter.
Yes. Well, he was good friends with Amon Carter, and he used to walk around in a hat that Amon Carter had given him.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the aluminum awning business and the fluorescent light business, but he also was one of the founding members of All Saints Church.
Okay.
And he's the one that picked up Bishop DeWolf from the train station, and he helped broker the deal to get All Saints Church where it was. and they wanted to make it a modern building at first, but him and Mr. Moncrief thought, no, we don't like this idea. And they went and they fired the architect with Father de Wolf, they got the same architect that had his father had been a preacher in a Gothic style church. So they all got together and then got a new architect to build the church as it is now.
Which is a very traditional looking church, right?
They wanted, at the time they wanted it modern.
Well, according to our past talks, he found Steeplechase. The
Yes,
Steeplechase
he was
Club,
one of the Steeplechase
as well as
founders,
Rivercrest, the actual club.
one of the founding members of Rivercrest, and he also was a founding member of the boat club.
Fort Worth Boat Club.
Yes.
And he carried a gun.
Oh, he carried a gun always, and a lot of my friends thought he was a Texas Ranger because he always had this same blue button-down shirt, the Stetson and cowboy boots, and he had this big gun on. And one time on Halloween, we go to get candy from his house, and we just hear him cussing and saying, expletive beggars. And my we go in, and these kids come off the porch screaming because my grandfather opened the door with the gun and goes, "What do y'all want?" And he walked around with that gun. And one time they were in a meeting he was on the Water Conservation District as well, and he was in a meeting with a bunch of bakers and people of influence, and they were talking about who was going to get water and where. And my grandfather pulls a gun out and puts it on the table, and they go, "What's the gun for?" And he says, just in case.
Yeah, so know that you're not taking it from my land.
Exactly. And actually, this was verified by my brother was in that same bank building as an assistant, and a guy came up to him and said, "Is Jack Coyne your grandfather?" And he said, "Yes." He goes, "I was actually an assistant to someone in this room, and your grandfather had pulled out that gun and said, I just want to make sure everyone's on the up and up."
Wow.
Anything else? These are all your on your father's side, correct?
This is my mother's side.
Mother's side.
On my father's side.
Well, real quick, was this guy
mother's?
with the gun? Was he the one that got the eye gouged?
Yes.
Well, what happened? Did he have a scar or anything?
It was just discolored. It was discolored.
Okay. Keep going. Sorry.
It was discolored. And then on my father's side, it was his ancestor that was the last messenger of the Alamo. But my grandmother was a semi-pro golfer, and Sports Illustrated called her the best female golfer in the United States.
What was her name?
Peggy Chandler.
Peggy Chandler.
And she had won the Texas Open when Babe Didrikson was disqualified because someone made a phone call because she was accepting money from, I guess it was a Dodge or Buick dealership. But in the Babe Didrikson story, my grandmother's the villain in the movie.
Oh, really?
Right.
It's very interesting what you've done with your family. You found the highlights of all of them. It's pretty good stuff.
Versus us, we find only the lowlights. Let's talk about.
Yeah.
Let's talk about.
Remember that time in the bathroom? No, I'm just kidding.
Let's dig further into your mom's background, but tell us about this Chief Running Bear story.
Oh, that was interesting, and that was Jacob Matthews who got the first land grant because the Indians were there, and that's why they call it Bear Creek, was Chief Running Bear. And so
the one off 377 there?
Yes.
Okay.
And so in order to graze his cattle and to live and be able to ranch, he had to make a deal with the local Indians, and it was Chief Running Bear, and they actually smoked a peace pipe and had a ceremony, and he offered them cattle in exchange for using the land. In exchange for using the land, right?
Yeah,
and for peace, and so that tree supposedly we used to shoot fireworks out from underneath it when I was a kid.
Yeah,
and that's at that tree they also hung cattle rustlers.
Mm.
It was the Wild West.
The tree still standing?
The tree was still standing last time I was there.
Oh, wow.
Is it right off 377 on the left-hand side, you said?
Yes.
Like if you're heading
right
south?
off Ben Day Murrin Road.
Okay.
Ben Day Murrin was J.W. Coyne's ranch hand.
Okay.
And
Now-
it wasn't a ranch hand. He managed the whole ranch. He managed the
Sure.
entire thing.
Yeah.
So it was a big operation.
Yeah.
And so, but Ben Day Murren was loyal to J.W. Corn, and he bought a lot of the ranch that he has from my Aunt Opal.
Okay.
From my Aunt Opal.
I know we're jumping around a lot, Alexander, and I'm sorry, but the story it just jumps around. And it just maybe that's the way it has to be. Who's Charles Yeager?
Oh, Charles Yeager was my great grandfather, and he was the first vice president of the Associated Press, and he owned the Rocky Mountain News as well.
And he worked for Randolph Hearst back in the day.
At one point, he did, and the rumor is that he took the job at the Associated Press because that was to be the guardian against Randolph Hearst taking over everything, that he supposedly took that job in order to kind of keep an eye out on everything for Mr. Hearst.
Do people ever tell you
He died in a
that
car
your
wreck.
stories are crazy? Or I believe you. We do, because I've heard you tell it before, and I've seen the notes and seen some documentation. But do people think this stuff is so wild it can't be true? Because it is incredible, all of the places your family's touched.
Oh, absolutely. And a friend of my mother's just said that's absolutely not true. So my mother pulls out this book, The Tailors of Tabernacle, and opens the page to Nicholas Martineau that came in 1620, and
Right.
and she says there is right there, and she said, why would my grandmother's name be in this book?
Yeah.
And so
And proved her wrong. Did the lady accept it? Who made that accusation that it was not true?
no, she accused her of picking up the book, and it was false, and wouldn't accept it. But it is kind of unbelievable. But the thing is everybody's family has some history somewhere.
Yeah.
They do, and they did a lot of things. I just happen to come from a family where there's a lot of oral history.
Yeah.
And some of the people, and when you look at in the expanse of time, these people did things, but some generations didn't do so hot, and then others, it was up and down.
Yeah.
In that book, he's seen this book that traces my family all the way back to 920. It's an accounting of everybody and the Herbermont family, and they didn't have anything nice to say about one guy, and they just called him the Bad Count.
Well, no, it's really interesting because as a young guy, you probably just did a whole lot. You're a quiet guy. We
Right.
know this. You probably just did a whole lot of sitting and listening and just hearing all
Right.
of these incredible stories
I
of these
did.
folks.
I learned it, and the thing of it was my grandfather was born in 1898.
Oh, yeah.
And he took me around, and I didn't think he knew my name till I was about 10. He called me Butch, and we'd go out to the ranch.
Uh-huh.
But he would tell me all these stories, and he
Yeah.
told me about how he worked on the largest sign in the world, and the fluorescent sign, and how fluorescent electricity worked. And he told me these stories about being down on the ranch, and told me the stories of his grandfather
Yeah.
and his great grandfather. And then, for example, when I went to San Antonio for a family reunion for the John William Smith, the last messenger of the Alamo, they literally were setting up cameras, and people were giving their own oral histories of who did what and things. And I find it remarkable, honestly, that some people don't know who or where their grandparents were born.
Right.
But if you
Yeah.
don't know where you came from, then how are you going to know what you're capable of and where you're
Sure.
going?
Sure.
Because when I feel that I can't do something, for example, I just say 170 miles, because that's how far John William Smith rode his horse to give the last message of the Alamo to Sam Houston.
Wow.
So let's
71 miles.
Can I ask you a more pointed question?
Sure.
We've jumped around again, but we're not attempting to do that. But your mother,
Oh, please.
we're getting closer to just where we are today. But your mom, born in 36, she had
Yes.
polio as a kid,
She had polio as a kid.
and tell us about some of the growing up with the maid situation you've mentioned before. Do you remember that story?
Oh, with my mother?
Yeah.
Well, what happened was they were so scared with polio. My mother had polio, and so she had no contact with my grandmother or grandfather for several months. And so it was just the living maid housekeeper took care of her. And so it was because no one knew if it was contagious or what. So, and she battled that, and you couldn't tell now that she had it.
But it's okay for the maid to get it, I guess, is just,
Yes. Yeah.
And then where did your mother go from there? Because she has quite a little story herself.
Oh, she went to the University of Mexico to study art, and she wound up. My grandfather had said, "Well, you have one day to find roommates, or you can't stay." And she found someone that was French and spoke English, and then someone else that was American. And she stayed there. And one of her friends was dating the vice president of Mexico's daughter. Or my mom's friend was dating the vice president of Mexico's son. So they used to go to parties at the presidential palace.
Oh, wow.
And she said when they were done with these parties that they would just hit this big gong and everyone was supposed to leave. But then in the cafe and the coffee shops, there was a great artistic movement with artists and writers, and a lot of existentialists hung out there. And I said, "So you were an existentialist?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you even know what an existentialist is?" And she goes, "I never did find out what an existentialist was, but I sure was a damn good one."
Yeah.
Nice. Couple more names from the family tree that I got to ask you about, because I feel I don't want to leave any of this unturned, because it's definitely worth talking about. Tell us about Uncle Jack Bell.
Okay, Jack Bell was a very interesting.
Britton, you're going to love this. This is incredible.
You're going to love this story.
Okay.
Jack Bell was a very interesting guy, and he was a genius and a Mensa member. And at 17, he wanted to join the Army Air Corps. So my grandfather got him in, and then he went to flight school, and he memorized. My mom went down to the library. She was 9 years old at the time, I think, and got a book of German, gave it to him. And while he was in flight school, he learned it. And he got three oak clusters. He was shot down several planes, and he was so good they put a camera on the wing of his plane, and we used to watch these films when I was a kid. And so he had mailed himself back a motorcycle, by the way.
Oh,
But
wow.
the most interesting thing is he was in the first flights over the Battle of the Bulge, and he got shot down in Belgium, and he got back on the underground railroad, as they would call it, however, whatever you call it, the underground passage. And he could speak enough German to get by. And so he went from farmhouse to farmhouse. He traveled at night and got himself back. And he came back with Nazi knives and things.
Yeah.
But then after the war, he married and got divorced. But the most interesting thing was he was a cloud seeder. And he caused a couple.
Do you know what that is?
No.
Britton? You're about to find out.
That's where you throw out. I believe it's an ionization bomb. It's a little canister, and it's about I would say about a foot long and about 5 inches in diameter. And you throw it out in the clouds, and it causes a reaction in the clouds and causes it to rain. And it's called cloud seeding. And he was on What's My Line for being a cloud seeder. But the most interesting thing was that he was contracted by the city of Fort Worth to do this, and he caused a flood. He caused it to rain too much. And so all the people were saying that he was interfering with God's work, and it didn't rain for a while, and there was a big controversy whether or not
It wasn't the
to
big
do it
flood,
anymore.
though, was it?
Not the big flood.
Okay.
This was a mini flood. So then they were going to hire him to do it again. And in the Star Telegram, there was on the front page two big cartoons of him, which we have of after the first one, and then them threatening him not to do it again. And it ended his career when the Baptists got involved, because the Baptist church were suing him for interfering with God's work. So he decided. My grandmother called it quits on him being a heretic.
Oh, yeah.
And interfering with God's work. So that ended his career.
You think those really work? I've heard, well, I mean, they don't really work, do they? Where they throw the bomb out there and it does that?
It did the day he caused a flood.
Yeah.
Well, we're not saying
Yeah.
we're not saying he caused
Yeah.
that we don't know if God did it, but he happened to be in the cloud at the time when
Yeah.
it started raining.
Sure,
Yeah, I've
sure,
never
sure.
even heard of that. I mean, has that ever been tried since then? I've never heard the
No,
term.
they
There
shoot
was-
stuff up in there.
There was,
yeah.
Clouds?
there was a movie called the Rainmaker 2.
Okay. The Rainmaker, the John Grisham book. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking Rain Man. I was thinking of Tom
And-
Cruise movie.
and-
The Rainmaker's
Dustin
about
Hoffman.
it's that Grisham book.
Yeah.
I think it's a different movie, I'm sure. But anyway.
And he unfortunately in '62 was murdered out at the ranch.
How
And
come?
It was a terrible story. A guy was hunting illegally on the ranch, and my uncle told him to go away. And then the guy came back and did it again like a couple of days later. And then so my uncle tied up his dogs. And then the guy got the dogs and then came back, went to the bar down the road, went to a bar in
Whiskey
377. I'm not sure what the bar was. Actually, it was there up until about 15, 20 years ago. And got drunk, went back and shot him with the double barrel shotgun. My great uncle was in his house and heard the shot and drove him to the hospital. He was dead on arrival. But the amazing thing is at that moment that happened, my mother was in Dallas. She doubled over in pain. And said she had unexplained pain and was doubled over in intense pain. And that was when he was shot too.
Were they twins?
No, but my mom has this weird psychic ability. She wouldn't let us go outside the day Elvis died. She knew something wrong was going to happen.
Seriously?
Seriously. I think she's connected.
All right,
I like
Alex.
how you say just connected.
All right. Dan Chandler. Who is this guy?
Dan Chandler was my grandfather in Dallas, my father's father, obviously, and he was the executive officer of the Philippines. He was a West Point graduate and was the executive officer of the Philippines. And then during World War II, he was the adjutant. He was in charge of security at West Point. And because they wanted him back for Allied command, but my grandmother did not want to. She said, "I went to the Philippines. I'm not going over to Europe to go get bombed, nor are you." So in order to make a deal with the Army so he could serve, he agreed if he could go to West Point. And actually, my grandfather said it was harder to get my uncle and father in West Point than it was to get my uncle out of West Point because he didn't fit. But
Yeah.
since he was in charge of security, the most valuable asset was the young recruits and the officers. So he took it very seriously. And my dad got a lot of jiding because the joke was Hitler would never invade West Point because my grandfather wouldn't give him a pass. So nobody could go out on dates
Right.
because my granddad didn't care
Yeah,
how
yeah.
good looking she was. You were staying in the barracks
Oh, yeah.
and safe. And
Yeah.
so, and he was a sugar broker, but, so he married Peggy Chandler,
Okay.
Peggy Lewis, who was my grandmother, who was the golfer.
Is he the one that founded the New York State Police?
Oh, that was George Fletcher Chandler,
Fletcher,
his
okay.
father.
My notes are bad.
George Fletcher Chandler, my great grandfather on my father's side, he was good friends with Roosevelt, met Roosevelt he was a surgeon.
Bill Roosevelt?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy, sorry.
Roosevelt during the Spanish.
Who's Bill
Are
Roosevelt?
you falling asleep over there?
Sorry, I
mean,
don't know what
you
is
know
going on.
We're on
My
camera.
allergies. I'm
Allergies.
sorry. No, my allergies make me really tired. I had to take a
well,
Benadryl because my
for-
allergies.
forgive my-
It's-
for my host,
it's-
Alex.
Sorry.
It's the tree thing.
Yeah.
So George Fletcher Chandler met Roosevelt during the Spanish-American War, and they wanted to. They needed a state police because it was like in the movie Porky's. When you cross county lines, the sheriff wouldn't do anything if there was a crime committed and someone from a very wealthy family child had gotten kidnapped, and they couldn't do anything, and so sheriffs weren't cooperating. So he hired my great grandfather, the governor of New York, to start the first New York State Police, and he went in with the uniform to my grandmother, and my grandmother said, "Get out of here. You look like a Russian Cossack," because she was German.
Oh, okay.
And so he said, "What if I put purple in it?" So she said, "Okay." So all he did was put a purple band on the hat, and the purple band on the hat for the New York State Police is still there, and it's a homage to my great grandmother.
Cheap.
Nice.
I love the
don't-
reference to
yeah.
Porky's, Alexander. I mean,
Right.
of all the guests with all the references, I don't believe we've ever had the reference to the movie Porky's. So good,
Yes,
good on
thank
you
you.
for
That's
that
the
one.
best way
You've
to
won the
describe.
day.
Yes.
That's the best way to describe a sheriff not crossing county lines.
Let's not forget about George Fletcher Chandler's brother Fromer. Is that correct?
Fromer Chandler, his brother. Or no, that was that was his son. My uncle, Fromer Chandler. Now with a name like Fromer and a father and a
Love to
father
travel,
who's
maybe?
military bent. He ran away from home at 14 because my great grandfather was going to send him to military school. So he joined vaudeville. And then he moved.
What's vaudeville?
Vaudeville is the same place where people like Bob Hope, George Burns, and all of them they got their start as comedians in shows. It was
was
on
like the
Broadway,
Laugh-
right?
Yeah, it was like the
where they did variety shows.
Laugh Factory or whatever in L.A., kind of like that stand-up
Right.
back in the day. Yeah.
Right. People like George Burns and them got
Yep.
their start. And so he moved to Hollywood and changed his name to Chick Chandler. And
Cool.
he was in a lot of the Blondie movies.
Uh-huh.
And he was good friends with Cary Grant, and they kept him around because he was a comedian, and they paid him something like a couple of $100 a week, and they would say, go to this studio or go to that studio. And he was in dozens of movies. And
He'd be the funny guy.
and yes, he was. At first, he was a straight man, but he was a good character actor. But he was hilarious, and he was the cop in "It's a Mad, 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 Mad World" that stopped Spencer Tracy at the end.
Huh.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, you're just kind of relating all of this thing. I'm still going back to the
Porky's.
and the not going outside when Elvis died. Like that's just it's crazy.
It was really weird. Same thing when the Pope happened, and so
Yeah.
when the Pope got shot.
Yeah.
It was really weird. Oh, but my mother, they had the live-in maid, Lily, was from the Dominican Republic, and practiced voodoo and things.
Oh wow. Maybe that's where that came from.
Yes.
Some of it. Yeah.
Yeah, who knows?
Are we missing anybody? Is there any?
Are we missing
I
anybody?
mean, there's this a lot going on here. Anybody? What's the craziest thing ever happened to you? Is there anything specific to you in the story?
Well, let's see. The craziest thing that happened to me was I woke up and thought, what am I doing here? Because I was about to become an alumnus of Harvard Business School. And the only reason I thought that I'd ever become alumnus of be at a Harvard Business School would be to deliver a pizza. And so I just think being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And my life has been where I've been motivated by these people that have done things. And then so the real estate company that I had, Alexander Chandler Realty, we wound up in years selling $1.4 billion in real estate and 7,000 transactions, but they didn't happen at once. And life doesn't always go the way that you think it would go, and things happen. But knowing the family's military background, I was fine at military school. I went there because it was a tradition. I got into real estate because of my mother, and she got in a car wreck and I took over her business. But these stories help motivate me when things aren't going well. I just look at that picture of John William Smith of the Alamo and look there, and then I look at the history and think all these people, it wasn't that they woke up and they were superheroes. No one wore a cape. What they were people that they were ordinary people that when the time came, they did their job.
Extraordinary things. Yeah.
They did their job in an extraordinary way, and they were ordinary people.
Yeah.
And it was those moments though, where became a catalyst for other things. They were people that seized opportunity, is what it was.
Yep.
And that's when you look back at all these people and all the things that they did, is instead of saying no, they said yes, and they took chances, which was a good life lesson that I could always take from all of these people.
Yeah.
Well, Alex, it's been a fun ride, my man.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a story.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very
It's
much.
been a pleasure.
Yep. So we always ask our guests, that's going to be hard for you because it's all been all familial. I got to ask you though, Alex, were you doing something like sitting around the dining room table? Because I envision you as a young boy just sitting on somebody's like this, and then I picture this family dinner of kinds, and where all these stories started, like within you. Were you busy like drawing or just because you got to have absorbed it somewhere?
I absorbed it. My grandmother, when I was a kid, for example, told me all these stories. She would give my brothers money to go to Toy Chest, which my grandparents lived across from Rivercrest Country Club, and she would give my brothers money to leave. And I didn't figure it out till later, but she wanted me to stay there, and she'd tell me all these stories.
Okay.
And my granddad would tell me on the way to the ranch, and then my mother shared those. And my dad didn't speak much. He was very stoic.
Yeah.
But it was that history was passed down, and it was passed down in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
We should all have that written down. I mean, everybody's got a story, as we know, but it's incredible you've done all this research and kept it intact. It's something you could save for forever now. So.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are related to people of consequence. They're just not aware of it.
Right.
So if they do a little research and ask those questions.
Yeah. Okay. So best day of life, no family, just what's Alexander Chandler's best day that he's ever had, family aside.
Family aside, that was a question that I didn't think you would ask. And actually, I think the proudest moment that I did have actually was when I did walk across the stage at Harvard, because it was something that I'd always wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I did it, and I finished when I was about 49, 48 years old. I wanted to go to a more of a prestigious college in the 80s, but because of the bank crisis, I couldn't do it, couldn't afford it. And it was something I did later in life that I did not think I could do or ever accomplish.
Yeah.
And I accomplished it. And so that was a very proud moment. And when I walked across the stage, the dean of the executive education department whispered in my ear, "You have many more mountains to climb, my friend."
Oh yeah, that's great.
That was a very proud.
Great job. Great job.
That's
well,
awesome.
Thank you for joining us. We've enjoyed the time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Captex Bank. Thank you, Britt. Now you can get back to your naps.
Come on,
Whatever's
man.
coming.
I don't know what was going on.
That has been another great edition of episode of FORTitude, Believe It or Not.
Yes, thank you.